Hey guys, how's it going? Jay here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are reviewing a tube DAC. And I believe that this tube DAC that is well under $2,000 before shipping is able to compete in a blind A/B test with a MSB DAC or something that is really high end. And that's coming from experience and my personal experience. Granted, please take it with a grain of salt, of course. And we'll get right down to why I believe this DAC can beat a lot of the $10,000 DACs out there. So first of all, this tube DAC is called the Doge 7 tube DAC. It's by Doge. And no, we're not talking about this Doge. We're talking about a tube DAC company called Doge. And Doge has been around for quite a bit of time, but nobody really knows about them because they were really making components for other companies. Now here is a call out, and here is really where the shame in the industry comes in. Is there was a company called Lua, and that company used to make components that somehow looks exactly like Doge components. And granted, they did not make DACs, but they made components that looked very similar to the Doge preamplifiers, amplifiers, and so on. So I asked Doge if this was a counterfeit or a copy of the Lua brand. And they told me that they are actually the people that made the Lua stuff and sent me a photo and some evidence of that. Now, that in itself is not malpractice. That in itself is not lying. But the lying part is where the Lua brand said that their stuff was made in Germany. And this is something that has and have been happening in the audio industry as well as other industries. I'm sure it's not just audio industry, but it is lying about where it is made so that they can jack up the price even farther. And this is something that is just disgusting to me as a reviewer. Now, when Lua as a brand disappeared, they no longer exist. Doge has had to find a way, because their customer went away, had to find a way to make money. And so they decided to make their own brand, and that is the Doge products. And the good thing about this is that Doge as a company is looking to sell directly to customers instead of high-end manufacturers who will lie where the product is made and actually put in cheaper components, which we will talk about in a minute when we open this up, and sell it for a higher price. So now we have a brand of a product that would have been, to their calculations, sold for around $6,000, $7,000 DAC. So this realistically in today's market, and from my findings, is realistically $6,000, $7,000 DAC. And you guys know me. I am a sucker for good deals, and I basically made my channel for exactly that reason, to find good products for the money. And this is one of the best products that have come in here in terms of performance to price ratio. This is just absolutely insane. This, in my mind, competes with $10,000 entry-level MSB DACs, no problem. In fact, if you were to A/B test the MSB entry DAC with this, a lot of people will fail that test. I can guarantee it. And in fact, some people may even prefer this DAC's more holographic and tube liquid kind of sound more than the MSB DAC, in my opinion. And of course, disclaimer, in my opinion. So without further ado, let's open this up and take a look inside what we're dealing with. So get the right screws here. And there's a lot of screws that you have to unscrew to get the cover off. So after unscrewing a shitload of screws, this top heavy aluminum or steel, whatever this metal piece is, plate comes out. And then we have this. So inside here, there are a few things that we need to go over. But first, I want to tell you what I find the most important in a DAC design. So there's three main things. So there's the DAC portion, the actual chip and the implementation inside the digital board, the digital to analog conversion, that's where it happens. And then there is the analog output stage, which is also very important. And then there is the power supply. So those three things, most engineers will agree with me, is the most important part of a DAC design and what makes a DAC sound good. Now, if you look at this design, we see that the digital board here is actually done by Matrix, or one of the best brands in China that knows about digital to analog conversion stuff. So Doge admittedly knows that they are an analog company. From the very first time they started out, the engineer has like 35 cumulative years of experience in analog. So he is very familiar with tube stuff, analog stuff, but he's not the expert in digital stuff. So instead of actually throwing in a chip in there and just pretending like, hey, it's a DAC, they actually reached out and found a person who specializes in making DACs. So that, I think, is an excellent example of how this industry should operate. If you're not an expert, find someone who is. Don't pretend that you can do this by throwing in a chip in there and pretending that you're an expert when you're not. So I think that's just a very good business practice. And they may not be using the most latest chip, but from my understanding, they have done countless A/B tests between different chipsets to find the one that is most suitable and good match in terms of sonic characteristics and how everything works together for their analog stage. And I always say this, but DAC chips in itself means very little in a DAC. The implementation of the DAC chip is what matters the most. So I guarantee you're not going to find a better performing DAC by just looking for the latest DAC chip. And that latest DAC chip, it will be outdated in 2 months or 3 months when the new DAC chip comes out. So that is not the ideal way. Trust me or not, that is how it is. Now, the analog output stage here is tube-based, and it's all analog. So it is completely separated from the digital section to the analog section. And then the analog section here, you see, is just miraculous. This is what I want to see more in the hi-fi industry. You have 8 tubes. Now this is the 8-tube version. There's the 6-tube version, which is only RCA. So this is a balanced version, has a balanced output. But you can also check that on their website. This is the most expensive version that has balanced output. But it has 8 tubes, and each of these tubes are not some junk tubes that's just thrown in there and shipped out like most manufacturers do. These are actually pretty high grade. Yes, they are made in China, but high grade tubes that Doge has went through to do the quality control twice. So Doge does it once and the tube manufacturer does it once, so that's 2 times. So these are very excellent tubes. This is what I've been using. Now the next step up, and I've tried tube rolling with many different tubes, etc. I find that other tubes that's made in the modern day is kind of a side grade rather than an upgrade. So I find these tubes to be just a perfect match with this tube DAC. If you want to upgrade, the next step would be to go to something like a new old stock tube, like Telefunken and stuff like that. But that will get very expensive very quickly, and it won't be a drastic change because these tubes are already pretty darn good. Now, another thing that you see here that I've been holding back a little bit, is the Clarity Audio capacitors. In fact, they are one of my favorite capacitors. These type of capacitors, just to give you a reference, is used in the high-end audio stuff all the time. This exact kind of crossover is used in, for example, some of the higher-end Sonos Faber speakers that's sold for $10,000 or more in the crossover network. And even Macintosh, even some audio research stuff, even some of the higher-end stuff in the world don't use this type of quality capacitors. And if they do, they will market it very heavily. Tell me one high-end manufacturer that uses Clarity capacitors in their stuff that don't put it in their product page. It uses Clarity audio capacitors, $20,000. This is under $2,000 and it uses many Clarity audio capacitors in its analog output stage. Let me just count how many is in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 Clarity audio capacitors. Just to give you a reference, Lua, the brand that basically Doge made their stuff for and marketed to like 20,000, 10,000, whatever crazy amount they were selling it for, had these capacitors changed to something lower quality, and that was to reduce the cost. Here you see actual high-grade capacitors being used. And one of the concerns that I had, because they were using so many high-grade parts and still keeping the cost low, is that some Chinese, I shouldn't say Chinese, some companies in general do purchase refurbished products. So refurbished capacitors, for example, refurbished Clarity Audio or Mondorf capacitors that is relatively cheaper so that they can keep the cost low. Now, refurbished capacitors in large do work, and they may not last as long or may have quality control issues, but that can be done in a house. Here, they are using genuine Clarity Audio capacitors, and they have receipts to prove it. That's how they put it to me. They basically buy this directly from the Clarity Audio distributor or from Clarity Audio from the A stock. So from the main stock and not B stock, not refurbished or anything like that. So these are perfectly legit Clarity Audio capacitors that you see in here. And if you're into audio as much as I am, you know that is one sexy looking DAC internal. That Clarity Audio, it just makes me feel so much value in this product. Now, the third important thing in a DAC design is the power supply. Now here, the power supply is relatively okay. I mean, it's adequate for a DAC. But of course, it is nothing like the Denafrips or insane separate power supply or anything like that. It is just adequate in my opinion. And for a tube DAC, this is very normal. And they are using pretty high quality EL transformers. The only thing is that the Lua brand back then, one of the reasons they justified selling it for much higher was because they had higher grade power supply, higher grade EL transformer. And you may be wondering what this is. And this is actually, to show you, you take these 4 screws off. You want to kind of do a zigzag. I don't want to I like to do zigzag instead of side by side, side to side. So when you take out all the screws, this comes off. Now this is a fully metal piece that is spring-loaded inside. So what this does is it goes on the tubes and it dampens it so that you don't hear any type of tube resonance or microphonics that may go on when you hit the tube or the music is playing. Because tube microphonics is very real, and you can test this very easily. If you have a tube amplifier or any sort and you have it connected to your speakers, just tap on it. You will hear a ding sound transferred to your speakers. So it's a very real problem that you see all the time. In fact, it happens to my Modrite LS100 all the time. When, for example, I kick the stand or something like that by accident, you hear that noise being transferred to the tubes to my speakers in near field setups. So this is a very smart way and very well thought out way to dampen the tubes and having the tubes secured without being knocked off or anything when you're moving around as well. So this is a very well thought out design. I really like it. And another thing that I want to mention about this DAC is that it does have a headphone jack and a preamp function. Now, when you're using this as a headphone amplifier, and yes, this is a very excellent headphone amplifier, very quiet, but I would say that this doesn't drive every headphone out there. It drives most headphones, and it is a very quiet tube headphone amplifier. But the volume knob should be only used when you're using a headphone amplifier. I don't recommend using the preamp on this unit. This unit is really meant to be used as a DAC, and Doge does make a separate preamplifier. So if you need a preamplifier, you can go with that. But I definitely don't recommend using the volume control on this unit because it's not meant to be used that way. And in my opinion, that's just like using your desktop volume control with a DAC connected instead of using a separate preamplifier to control the volume. It's a pretty huge difference in my opinion. In the back on this unit, we have all the digital inputs, and then we have the analog outputs, which also has the balanced version and the RCA on this unit. Now on the back, you also see a ground, and this can be normal or noise reduction. When I clicked on the noise reduction, I found that the overall noise floor dropped. However, I didn't find it to be the most pleasant sounding to me. I found that on normal was the most pleasant sounding to me, but it was very small differences. I think you will enjoy trying out both if you have this unit. And it comes with this very nice volume knob that is metal. One complaint, I really don't have much complaint about this remote, it feels very nice, is that it does this when I flip it over. That's the volume, physical knobs kind of, because this is like a ball, it's like a ball bearing, it kind of shifts over and back. So that's just a little complaint, but the ball bearing kind of feeling does make this volume knob feel much better and feel much more high quality in my opinion. So in terms of its design, it is done very well. So how does it sound? Well, you already know what I think. This compares to a $10,000 DAC very, very easily in my opinion. In fact, it comes down to preference. So in performance and material cost and kind of the design overall, it competes with a $6,000 DAC and even some $10,000 DACs very easily. But in terms of its sonic characteristics, you may find that this DAC is more to your taste than even compared to a $20,000 DAC or so on, because this DAC just draws you in a different way to your music if you had the same experience as I did. So for me, when I heard this DAC, I had an emotional attachment right away. And you get that feeling when you hear your music and it just draws you in every single time without fail. The next day, the day after, you keep listening, and every music you play, it just sounds so natural, so organic, so large, so to scale, so that it freaks you out and gives you goosebumps on the back of your neck. That is exactly what I got when I switched nothing from my system but the DAC to the Doge 7 DAC. But going into the individual elements, I found the bass to be extremely tight and controlled and linear sounding, even though this is a tube DAC. And tubes or tube devices are not necessarily known for their strong bass characteristic. They are known to be a little bit loose, a little bit loosey-goosey, and not very good in the bass region. Well, this one sounds very, very tight, almost like a solid state device. So I was very surprised by that. It is very well controlled. and it's linear. It doesn't have exaggerations. For example, the SMSL M400 DAC I reviewed, I found that to be a little bit exaggerated in the bass region. This doesn't have that. And the mid-range is going to be extremely liquid, and that's where this DAC will really shine. You play jazz, you play any type of female vocals or male vocals, and it's just breathtaking. The amount of holographic soundstage, the depth, the imaging is just so perfect, at least to me. And it connected me in an emotional way. And that's very hard to do because usually soundstage and imaging is almost like a trade-off. When there's holographic soundstage with tube amplifiers, you lose some of the pinpoint imaging that a solid-state device offers. But this DAC provides both. It has very good focused imaging, just like a solid-state DAC, but it opens up and the soundstage is large and holographic, three-dimensional, and liquid sounding in the mid-range as any tube DAC should. And the last time I heard a tube DAC that drew me in this emotionally to music was the Lampezator and the Alnick tube DACs. And those DACs are very expensive. And I'm not talking about the entry level. I'm talking about the mid to higher end level of their DACs. So that kind of experience was what I got from the mid-range of this DAC. And then to the high frequency. Now the high frequency is not a typical tube DAC or a tube device type of sound. You may expect a little bit more smoother, rolled off type of sound. No, this is very articulate. It has extremely good details, and it is extremely, in my opinion, accurate. And that is kind of weird because you usually never use the word accurate for a tube DAC, but the high frequency and the overall tonal balance in how the cymbal hits and how the high frequency projects itself, to me, sounds very natural and truth to life as a DAC can get. So it is not a boring sounding DAC. It does have energy on the top end, and if you are very prone to high frequencies, like very prone, you may find it slightly on the brighter side. However, this DAC to me is not bright. It is very open sounding, it's smooth on the top end, but you need to have the DAC broken in. And this is not a question of, does break-in exist? This is a tube device. It needs warm-up time. It needs some time for it to sound right. For me, I found that this DAC sounded excellent out of the box, but many of my Patreons who bought it because of my recommendation in the Patreon recommendation list, they recommend that this DAC to be run about 200 hours or so before it sounds extremely good to their ears. And so far, I think all the Patreons who have bought this DAC thought this DAC to be an excellent DAC, and they're very happy with it. Comment down below or send me a message on Patreon if you don't think so. Now, comparing it to something like the Holospring 2 or the Denafrips Pontis, for example, those DACs are a little bit more laid back. They're a bit more warmer sounding. And so that may be to more of your taste. This DAC has air, it has excitement on the top end, and it has a lot of detail that is just portrayed in a way that is smooth, liquid, well balanced from top to bottom. So it's just different in taste. I wouldn't say that this DAC totally destroys the Denafrips Pontis, because the Denafrips Pontis in its own is a very strong contender in this price category and above, and it did win the best award as well. And when we had both of the DACs in here, the Denafrips Pontis, the Holospring 2, and this DAC, we compared all three, and this is what I found. I found that the Holospring was the warmest sounding, followed by the Pontis, and this DAC was on the brighter side. But none of these DACs sound bright or forward or shrill to my ears. They all sound excellent. So that's it from me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and also consider joining our Patreon to keep us independent and keep these honest reviews coming. And I'll see you guys on the next one.